Cancel culture is destroying America, or at least, that's what it feels like to so many. But to understand how we got here, we have to step into the shoes of real people caught in the storm. It begins with silence, not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the suffocating silence of a man who has lost his voice in his own country. Blake Bailey, once a celebrated biographer, sits in his study staring at stacks of books that once defined his life's work. He had spent decades capturing the lives of literary giants, pouring his soul into the craft of biography. But then, with a single accusation, before trial, before fact, before clarity, he was cast out. The phone stopped ringing, the contracts dried up, former colleagues avoided eye contact in public. It wasn't just his career that collapsed, it was his very sense of identity. At the same time, Anthony Scaramucci, a man who had lived at the crossroads of politics and media, was watching a disturbing shift unfold across the nation. He had seen America survive recessions, wars, and scandals. But what he saw now was different. It was a kind of social mob justice, fueled not by laws or courts, but by viral hashtags, angry threads, and instantaneous judgment. He felt the danger wasn't just in people being held accountable, that was necessary in a free society, but in the lack of nuance, the absence of forgiveness, and the total erasure of human complexity. And then there was Saul Gittleman, a professor emeritus who had taught generations of students. Saul had witnessed the cultural transformation of America over decades, from the civil rights movement to Vietnam protests, from free speech battles on campuses to the internet revolution. He loved his students deeply, but he noticed something unsettling: fear. Not the fear of exams or failure, but the fear of speaking freely. Students whispered their real opinions in private, afraid of being branded, shunned, or exiled from social groups if they said the wrong thing. How, Saul wondered, can a democracy survive if its young people are too afraid to speak? Together, these three voices, Bailey, Scaramucci, and Gittleman, illustrated a story larger than any single one of them. It was the story of America at war with itself, a nation where the pursuit of justice was colliding with the danger of absolutism. For some, cancel culture felt like long overdue justice. Victims who had been ignored for decades were finally being heard. Abusers who had hidden behind power and money were being toppled. There was power in the movement, an undeniable reckoning with injustice. But for others, it had become something darker. A world where a single misstep, an old tweet, or even an unpopular opinion could lead to permanent exile. The tragedy was not in the idea of accountability, but in the execution. Nuance was gone. Redemption was gone. The chance to learn and grow from mistakes had been replaced by permanent branding, a scarlet letter written in pixels. And what happens to a society that no longer believes in forgiveness? Scaramucci told a story of a young man he knew who had applied for jobs in finance. He was brilliant, disciplined, and hardworking. But years earlier, in college, he had made a crude joke on Twitter, one that resurfaced. The companies rescinded their offers. His entire future derailed by a moment of immaturity that no longer defined him. Saul recounted the story of a female student who confided that she no longer spoke in class discussions. She had opinions, thoughtful ones, but worried she might phrase something incorrectly, and once it was out there, she could never take it back. Her silence became her safety. And yet, silence on college campuses meant the very purpose of education was slipping away. Universities were no longer crucibles of debate, but minefields of fear. And Bailey, his story was perhaps the hardest. Whether guilty or not, he had been judged by the mob long before he ever saw the inside of a courtroom. And even if the truth someday cleared him, the stain was permanent. In his words, "They don't just take away your job, they take away your right to exist." But here is where the story turns. Because America has always been a nation of extremes, and yet, always, it finds a way to bend back toward balance. The voices of warning were not calls to abandon accountability, but to rediscover humanity. Scaramucci, who had once himself been cast out in political infamy after only 11 days in the White House, came back, not by erasing his past, but by owning it. He rebuilt his career by leaning into honesty, admitting mistakes, and reminding the public that failure is not final. Saul reminded his students of history. He told them of McCarthyism, of book bans, of blacklists in Hollywood, of times when America gave in to fear and censorship. And he reminded them. Each time, America found its way back. Each time, free voices rose again. And Bailey, though broken, still wrote. He picked up his pen because writing was not just his career, it was his survival. His message was that art, literature, and truth itself cannot be cancelled. They endure. The emotional core of this story is simple. Cancel culture is not about left or right, young or old, powerful or powerless. It is about what kind of society we want to be. Do we want to be a nation of permanent exile, where a single mistake defines a person forever? Or do we want to be a nation of growth, forgiveness, and second chances? The conclusion is both painful and hopeful. Cancel culture is destroying America, but only if America allows it. Because the cure lies not in censorship or silence, but in dialogue, compassion, and courage. It lies in the willingness to confront wrongdoing, but also to believe in redemption. It lies in speaking, even when it is risky, and listening, even when it is uncomfortable. As the sun sets on this story, the message is clear: America does not have to be defined by cancellation. It can be defined by conversation. It can be defined by resilience. It can be defined by the radical belief that people are more than their worst moments. And in that belief lies hope, not just for the individuals who have been silenced, but for the soul of a nation that has always fought to remain free.